So please give a warm London welcome. 8 times, I repeat that, 8 times winner of the Hawaii Ironman, Paula Newby-Fraser. Well, welcome to London, Paula.
Thank you.
I believe that you're going to be move away. We don't want the feedback on there. We're in London now, but you've previously been based in the States, but I believe you're actually going to be spending a lot more time in Europe with your current role.
Yes, I am. I actually just arrived in Europe a couple days ago. I'm going to be working with the Ironman organization in Europe, and so based out of Frankfurt. Ich kann keine Deutsche sprechen, so I'm working on my German, and so I'm looking forward to attending a lot of the races in the European Tour this year. Yeah.
So let's start at the start. Well, this seems a good place to start. See if we can sort that. We'll get our audio guy back. We'll be able to sort that, I'm sure.
Yes.
Your start point in triathlon. Tell us about how you came from. I think it was the former Zimbabwe, South Rhodesia, would have originated from. Early 80s, when triathlon very much at infancy. So how did you first get into the sport?
So I was born in Rhodesia, which is now Zimbabwe, and moved down to South Africa at a young age. And in the 70s and 80s, South Africa is just crazy country with endurance sports. Comrades Marathon, the Doozy multiple day kayaking marathons. Ultra sports down there was just the norm, and running a marathon was literally the equivalent of running a 5K when I grew up, and I lived right on the Comrades Marathon course, so very exposed to endurance sport. Obviously, growing up in South Africa, very limited access to television. We didn't even get television until the late 70s, so very active in school. It was mandatory. Physical exercise was very mandatory. So I got involved in sports at a very young age, and was a competitive swimmer. Studied from about the age of 4, studied classical ballet dancing because my goal in life was to become a ballet dancer. And when I left school and went to university, I had a hiatus away from sports because obviously when I grew up in South Africa in the 70s and into the early 80s, access to international sport at that particular time was non-existent in South Africa because of apartheid. So you know, you were involved in sports, but you were kind of stuck down in the southern part of Africa, and that's really all you could do. There was nothing to, there was no way to get out and participate in the Olympic Games or anything else at that particular point. So it wasn't until I was well out of university and working that I was introduced to triathlon by a friend of mine at work, and I'll honestly say that my evolution into triathlon was strictly lifestyle. I was working, partying, just a general life, and my friend of mine just said, you know what, we really need to lose weight. I had gained quite a few pounds, and she encouraged me to start running. And as soon as I started doing some running, it was like I connected to something that I was so familiar with, which was being an athlete, and I loved it. And I hadn't done any running whilst I was growing up. I was a swimmer, so it sparked something in me, and somebody said, hey, you used to be a swimmer, why don't you try a triathlon? And I go, this is utterly crazy, this is craziness, swimming, biking, running, but somehow, like I'm sure all of you do, you get talked into it, but come on, it would be so much fun, you know? And so in that very weird and perverted sense of what people think is fun, I went off and did my first triathlon down in South Africa, and that really was the evolution into it. And I had such a great background in swimming. I had gotten very fit running, and I did well at my first triathlon down there, and at that point I was, like so many others, I kind of got hooked. I saw the potential. I go, well, I'm new to this. I had very, very little knowledge about the Ironman in Hawaii. I had sort of heard about it. I did my first triathlon in 1985, so a long time ago. And it was, yeah. And honestly, it was in that first year that I had the opportunity to go to Hawaii, because we had a race in South Africa, which first place prize was, it was a long course race, which I got sucked into entering probably a few months later. First place prize was a trip to do the Ironman in Hawaii. And honestly, that's how it all began. I went to Hawaii, stopped in California on the way home, and here I am today, never looked back after that.
Well, I can honestly say in all of the many interviews I've done with many athletes over the years, the words, I was planning to be a ballet dancer and then I ended up as an Ironman, is probably a new one on many responses I've had.
Yeah.
So you're saying you did that first triathlon in 1985. So
Yes.
a few years on from there, nearly 30 years on. 30 years on from there, we're in this massive...
You know, I was 5 when I did my first triathlon.
Exactly. To do that well at Cone at 5, very impressive. We're here in London. We've got this massive hall. We've got this huge show. In the UK alone, we've probably got 600 triathlon clubs. We've got 1,000 events. But just tell us about what triathlon, what awareness did triathlon have at that time? Because it'd be very different from the... We're almost mainstream.
Almost. And you know, it's very interesting, when I started in triathlon, it was such a grassroots sport. It was the challenge of it all, of doing it, and so some of the smaller details nobody cared about. It was if there's a challenging course, but at the same time, because of the television show in the US, at that time was ABC Wide World of Sports, it sort of created this enigma about the Ironman and what was possible, and using some amazing production and some amazing stories. It really captured the imagination, and I think that became this little ray of hope that the sport that we thought was very small was going to become something bigger. We all love it because it's such a challenge. We loved it, and all we wanted was recognition, growth. We wanted more sponsors to get involved. We wanted more media to get involved, and it really started in the early 1990s when in the US certainly we had so much more television exposure, and you know, the races started to pop up, and it wasn't actually until the year 2000 that we had the first Ironman event on the mainland of the US, because outside of that there was a race in Canada, and when I say mainland, the Canadians would boo me for this because they are mainland North America, but it was, you know, we had the one race up in Penticton. Otherwise there were races in New Zealand, one in Australia, one in Lanzarote in Germany, and that's all there was. And it wasn't until 2000 that in the US that we got our first Ironman race in Florida and in Lake Placid, and it was like somebody flipped a switch, and local communities and the general public started to become exposed to triathlon by virtue of the races coming to their community. And once this tiny little town, Lake Placid, that had hosted the Winter Olympics, had an Ironman, I think had 2 people from the local community do the race, and then the following year there were 25, and on and on and on. So really that started, I feel like, the growth of it. And I got to tell you, the UK, what is going on in the UK? Every time we pop up a race here, it takes 40 seconds to sell out. It's like nobody can get enough of it. So it's wonderful. It's a bit of a double-edged sword, to be honest. We've craved this kind of popularity. We're right there in terms of the mainstream. And that comes also with a lot of challenges because of the growth. But I think this is an incredible time, not just for Ironman, but for triathlon as a whole. The Olympic Games, you had the Brownlees up here. It's absolutely marvelous, and I think as more exposure and the Olympic champions come to Ironman, I think it's going to be amazing.
So you talked about starting triathlon in 1985, and probably certainly unusual these days, because it would be fairly difficult, is you started in 85, you did Kona in 85.
Yes.
Top 4 or 5, I forget the exact one, but 10.5 or so hours.
Yes.
Very solid time.
Yes.
How did you go from that point of you've just come into this new sport, you've won this competition, gone to Kona? At which point did it become, this is what I'm going to make my? It may not have even been career at that time, but this is what I want to be.
So in 1985, I got to go to Kona, and I have to be honest, I trained for that Kona. I lived in North London, actually. I lived up near Hampstead Heath, did all my training for Kona, just right here, to be honest with you, and went over, got 3rd-degree sunburn, and all the great things that happen when you arrived in Kona. So I stopped in San Diego because all the top athletes in the world appeared to live and train in San Diego, California. So on my way home from Kona, I had the opportunity to stop and spend a week or so in San Diego. And that's when I got to meet, at that point, some of the legends of the sport. Julie Moss lived there, Mark Allen, Scott Tinley, and I just thought to myself, I really, really would love nothing more than to get a sponsor and to be able to do nothing but train and do triathlons, because they looked like they were living the life. And I was making my way actually back to London and then heading back to South Africa, to be frank. And I made the journey home, and I was 23 years old at that point, and I asked my dad, and he supported me. He gave me a ticket, and I said, please let me go to San Diego and see if I can make it as an athlete. I didn't want to live in South Africa. I didn't, you know, I had to give it a train and see what I could do. And it was the opportunity to go to California and train with the best, to train with Mark Allen and see what he did and what Scott Tinley was doing, and Julie Moss and Colleen Cannon, and it was I just made it the first year, and then by 1988 I decided that I made a mental switch to make this my career and focus everything that I had on turning this into a full-time job, you know, with my sponsors, with training, with trying to win. It was around about 1988 that I made the mental switch that this was no longer going to be a hobby. I actually wanted to live in San Diego. I wanted to move there, and I wanted to be a professional athlete. I wanted this to be my job and what I did. So it was a very conscious decision at that point. 2 years prior, it was like, you know, it was just like, this is just going to be something I'm trying for a couple of years, and then I'll go back and to my real life. So, yeah.
So, when was the first time you had success at Kona? Whether that was winning or whether first time you went there and you thought, yeah, I'm up there. I belong, and I can do this, and that then triggered, you know, best part of 15 or so years of that island.
Well, actually, it was my first race. I went to Kona in 1985, and my first Kona I finished 3rd. And I was racing against the top girls in the sport at that time, Joanna Ernst, Julie Moss, and I felt that on the training that I had done, living in London, trying to train, going over there, I felt once I had the opportunity to race against them, I go, if I can find a way to train like they do, I think that I can make this. So really, it was the first time I went to Kona, and in 1986 I had made the move to San Diego, and I had a whole year of living and training there, and in 1986 was the first year I won the event in Kona. So.
And how did Kona in 1986 compare to Kona now in terms of the scale? I mean, I've seen it develop probably the 25 years I've been in the sport, and I know even early 90s it was even big then, but at that stage, 86, were we just on the big growth spurt of Ironman, and particularly Hawaii Ironman?
Yeah. Well, in the late 80s, early 90s, 70s. The field wasn't that big, it wasn't as big. I think the first time I raced was a little over 1,000 athletes. And then over the years, through the 90s, usually the field was around 1,600 athletes because there weren't that many qualifying races. So it was always big because the American television is there, which always made it a very, very big deal. Everybody in the sport around the world came and congregated, but it just fed the monster. And I don't know how many of you have had the opportunity to go to Kona, but now it is just crazy. It's crazy, but it's not just crazy for 4 or 5 days. It's crazy for about a week or 10 days. It's like the whole world of triathlon and multi-sports is here in this tiny little town, which actually has grown significantly, but this tiny little town, and it's just all the like-minded, you know,
do they let anybody in that is over 8% body fat? Because I've seen some pictures.
What?
Just people walking around, and I think I'm not too big, but I don't think I'd want to walk around. I would feel huge because everyone there looks
so fit. And you know, honestly, the Undie Run is probably as big now as the Ironman was when I first when I first went there in 1985. I think they have more people at the Underpants Run than when I did the Ironman the first year. So and everybody running around, always dressed in the least amount of clothing, but with some compression socks and a heart rate monitor on. So it's just it's crazy, but it's sort of the Mardi Gras. It's become the Mardi Gras of triathlon, and it's a wonderful experience. If you have the opportunity to go in your triathlete, whether you're racing or not racing, it's still a great experience to get out there and be on the course.
So you then went on to win 8 titles in total.
Yes.
A couple of second places and thirds.
And fourths, yes.
What do you think it was that enabled you to keep the longevity going of both fitness and mental, but also the ability to keep at that level for so long?
So just to give a reference point, when I'm in Kona and I shut my eyes, the conditions in Kona are a complete replication to the city of Durban, where I grew up in South Africa. If you close your eyes in Kona and you were in Durban in South Africa and you close your eyes, the heat and humidity is the same. So I feel like I had a distinct advantage as an athlete growing up in an environment and competing in an environment that was very similar. And as strange as all of this is, I feel like my longevity was simply because I never pushed the envelope of training. I had some mentorship in my athletic career early on from Professor Tim Noakes, who was out of the University of California, and he always told me, he goes, "Paula, you always get by with the least amount of training that you can." And I was very true to those words until about mid-1990s, where I finally got sucked into the mega mileage that a lot of the professional men were doing, and I went to Boulder, and you know, everything kind of went haywire after that. But I will say that my longevity was that I always erred on the side of caution in terms of training, and I had trust in what I was doing because I was self-coached at that point. I was pretty intuitive about it, but it was so as I look back at the consistency and longevity of racing Ironman races, and I look now, I think probably the single biggest thing that I think that most athletes, the mistake that athletes make that dents their longevity is the tendency in terms of the quantity mixed with the intensity of training that athletes do now. It's pretty mind-blowing when I look at it, to be honest.
And I think one of the bits, because you are, I guess, like Dave Scott and Mark Allen, so associated with Kona.
Yeah.
You know, they've got their 6 wins, you've got your 8.
Yes.
The other remarkable stat is, it wasn't just Kona, you won, I think, 24 Ironmans over your career. And there was one period where you won something like 21 out of 25 over. So you won practically every race you did. So how many times would you have been racing per year over that period? Because as you mentioned, in terms of race development, now we can do an Ironman practically every week. At that point, there weren't many on the calendar.
No. So I started with 2 Ironmans a year. I started obviously the first years in 1986, 1987, it was just 1. But by the time 1988 rolled around, I was doing 2 a year, and from then on it was more. It was 3. It was usually 3 Ironman races plus, you know, either the Zofingen used to have a long distance duathlon, or the event in Nice, France, that wasn't a full distance Ironman but still a long distance triathlon. So I would generally do 3 to 4 long distance triathlons in a year. But the trick to that, there wasn't a whole lot of training going on in between those events. I would bookend my year with, the number of hours of training was limited. I could probably count on my hands how many times I ever trained over 20 hours a week in total, which nowadays the average person with a family and a job and everything else, I see pulling that off, which is quite stunning. So
I think also just to put it into perspective, what you did back then, and you're saying I didn't train much, and it was if you look at say for example the number of the times in Kona, you went under 9 hours winning Kona, and 1 year 11th place overall, including the men. The history of Kona, even since then, only 3 other women have gone under 9 hours, so it wasn't like you were winning in a soft time, or what you were doing there was seriously high benchmark. Do you think a lot of that comes down to that? Because I was going to ask the training question now. We can walk around here. There will be any number of training companies. There will be people like yourselves, like Paul over there, many others that have got experience that we can ask. When you started, there wasn't people with 10 years of experience of Ironman. So was that key, that guidance that you had in your case from Professor Tim Noakes? You know,
it's an interesting question, because there is so much information available and so many things you can use to support and guide training. You know, and having said that, we do have a lot more novices coming into the sport, complete first-timers that, you know, don't have a strong background. I think in the years that I was racing, the folks that were doing Ironman races tended to have some background in another sport and were strong in it, so had some intuitiveness. Whereas I think that just the general profile of athletes in the sport is newer, and so I think for that reason, a lot of these training aids and guides and coaches are very necessary right now. I had the opportunity. I grew up as a swimmer, so I had a swimming coach, and it was very clear that I was horribly overtrained as a young swimmer, you know, being pushed to swim whatever it was, you know, 15K a day at a young age, and clearly hated it and was burned out by it, and that stayed with me into my triathlon training. So when it comes to the speed of Kona, I mean, look, Mark and Dave were going, they were
8 or 9 back in 1989. That would have won the last 3 years, I think.
And I think what it is, and this now flips over to more of a mental deal, is that there wasn't anything to guide me. I didn't have a heart rate monitor to train with. I didn't have a power meter. I didn't have any benchmarks in my training. So I truly believe that there wasn't any set boundary that I was aiming for. There was never a particular time the start line was take my watch off and hand it to somebody. I just knew what I wanted to feel like. I knew what those great training days felt like, and that was all I was aiming for, was that feeling that I had in training. So I don't think that during the course of the race, I never had to look at a watch and go, you know, it's taking me 2.5 hours to get to the turnaround of the bike, or looking at a watch and judging my pace on the run or anything like that. Everything was dialed into how I felt and how my nutrition felt during the race. And I think for that reason, the boundaries of that you set for yourself sometimes with the objective numbers of power and speed, and that a lot of athletes use to guide them through the races, I think sometimes hold them back. That you know what, you never know what you might be capable of if you dial a little bit more, use those numbers in training, but then don't use them in races, because it's, you know, you go there hopefully in the best shape you can be in from training. So that's all I ever did was work on what I felt in training and what I hoped it would feel like in races. And so I would say that is probably the reason why we went, you know, we were able to post those times. Yeah.
And you had all that success in Kona, you won those 8 titles, but I remember one year that I watched, you got, I think, somewhere probably about 800 meters away from making it 9 titles. Yeah. And then something happened. Yeah. What, if anything, do you actually remember about that? And just tell us about that event, because it was quite, I'll say, great viewing. I don't mean great, but it was a spectacle to see. It was quite an event.
Interesting enough, the most memorable Ironman that I did was that one. It was just a simple case of losing track of what was going on the day, and more concerned about winning the race and not actually handling what was going on, which was my nutrition and pacing. I had gone into that with the hopes of winning my 8th title, and the only thing that mattered to me on that day was winning the race. I had built up so much pressure on myself and others around me that it was a case of it was either winning or it was going to be an utter failure. So I think in the latter part of that event, all I cared about was how far behind second place was, and that I became so consumed with that I had stopped paying attention to my nutrition, and that ultimately caught up to me, because that was my lesson, that you can never let your mind get too far away from what's going on in the immediate time. So it was
for those who don't know, just how close to that finish line on a Leahy Drive were you before? And it was quite a dramatic meltdown. We saw a presentation earlier on nutrition with somebody wobbling around, and that was you that year.
Oh, okay. It was about 400 meters from the finish line that I had my 8th title in my hand and didn't manage to close the deal, which was a testament to how much you have to stay dialed in mentally with yourself on any given race, that you can't disappear off into something else and be worried about. I was just worried. All I cared about was winning that race, and so and you know what, it was, and to this day everybody said it's a very courageous, and it was very emotional, and I go, well, not really, because I was trying to win an 8th title in Kona. I'm a professional athlete, I should know better than that. So, you know, I know better than that, but nonetheless, it just goes to show that if you lose yourself out there, as much training and preparation as you do, you always have to be in charge of your mental faculties, because things can go horribly wrong.
So much of your career is in other distances, because it's something that everyone just talks Kona, Paula, and forgets anything else, but I'm sure there were other memorable things that you did in your career.
There were, but honestly, Kona and Ironman are what I feel like have defined me and where my talent was. I did race the USTS, the United States Triathlon Series, the Bud Light Series in the US. I won the Bud Light Series, which is an Olympic distance event in the US. I did a lot of sprint races, some duathlons, the Nice Triathlon, but you know, I was always up and willing to race anything and everything, and but obviously Ironman was always my focus.
And an area that I didn't know about until I did a little bit of research yesterday was when you sort of came to the end of your triathlon professional career, you actually then did some ultra running and had some success there. So as if your body hadn't taken enough over 15 plus years of endurance, you decided that's to try and take on another discipline.
It was a very small foray into some of the some trail running marathons, a 50K, and then some of the enduro right now. If you ask what I'm doing right now, it's the enduro mountain biking events, like the 100K, 50K. Everything I do now is off-road trail type stuff. I've watched my husband has done the Western States 100, which I won't do. He's done the Leadville 100, which I've been to watch twice, and I can't quite fire up for that, but definitely enjoying the off-road, longer mountain bike events. But my goal certainly this year in Europe is I see it looks like some brilliant trail running events all over Europe, so definitely looking to hit one or two of those this summer, so very excited about that.
And you're still very much involved in Ironman. You're talking there about those events. That's, I guess, as a participant, maybe a little bit more like us and enjoying them rather than the pressure of professionalism. But just talk a little bit about what you're actually doing within the sport now for your now professional life, because you're working with Ironman, perhaps doing some coaching and other things.
So just right now, I work for Ironman full-time, have been for many years. The thing that I'm probably most proud of back about 6 years ago was tasked to work with WADA, and Ironman signed on as the first private organization to become a signatory to the WADA code. So Ironman built their own anti-doping program, which has built up probably to be the biggest in the sport. So I work with that. I work with some of the professional athletes, and I work in the marketing department. So I've had the opportunity to work with some fun projects, some celebrity athletes in the U.S., top NFL player, and last year our most decorated winter Olympian, and this is the U.S. short track speed skater Paula Newby-Fraser. So he did Kona, and
he did Kona really
and
well.
He broke 10 hours, which was really amazing for an athlete that's such an explosive. But he's just an athletic force, though, young, talented athlete. So I wear a number of different hats. I work a lot with the professional athletes right now. So love to be able to work with them and look at them and see a lot of myself. And also, I think it's a little bit of karma coming back at me working with it. Yeah.
What I'd like to do now, we have a good crowd here. We have the most successful Ironman athlete of all time. And many of you either will be, or aspire to be Ironman or do other triathlon events. It'd be great to get some questions from the floor to Paula. So if you do have any questions, A, don't be shy, and B, you can just put your hand up. I'll come out with a microphone and we'll see if we can provide some great insights to you. So.
Hello.
I'm doing my first Ironman in July in Bolton. I just wanted to ask you, it sounds like you've played it perfectly throughout your career. It's very inspirational. Is there anything you would have done differently looking back?
Is there anything
that you would have done differently? It seems like you've played everything just right. Is there anything that you might have done differently looking back?
If we had some prizes, that would get a prize. That was a good question.
That's a really good question. She asked if there's anything that I would do differently. As you stand here now, say, well, I wouldn't be where I am if I had, but there was one moment in my career toward the end of my career, I had won my 8th Ironman, and then I started to struggle a little bit mentally, and there was a gentleman by the name of Steve Scott, America's most famous miler. He had a great career in track. And he said to me, he goes, Paula, take a break, walk away for a year and get some perspective. And I was like, well, yeah, what do you know? And if I suppose that if I was to step away now, I wish that I had taken his advice around 1997, 98 and actually taken a year off and stepped away, because I always felt like I had a few more races in me, and I did do some other Ironman races, which I won. Subsequent to that, I still raced in Kona into early 2000 and finished 4th, and I just wish that I had, if I had to do it again, I would take a year away and regroup. It's that so often when I was struggling a little bit, and sometimes when you start to struggle, you then compensate and go, well, now I'm not doing enough. Why? You push even harder. And he was looking from his career as our greatest track and field 1 mile athlete, and he said, and that's what I would do differently. I do sincerely feel like I would have had 1 or 2 more great races in me had I had the courage to let it go. But it's so hard, and I know that as an athlete, when you're fit and you're in shape, and sometimes it's hard to just let it go because you think you're never going to get it back, and you can scale that all the way down to a week-to-week training. It's like you don't want to let something go because you're not sure if it's going to come back to you. So that's the only thing that I think that I would change.
Good question, good answer.
Yes, thank you.
Who have we got next up for question? I'll come back to you next. We've got one guy here, got his hand up first.
Of Lanzarote and Kona, which was the hardest race?
Oh, you know, if I had to peg what I consider the toughest race, and you know, please remember that I didn't race all, not like Wales, some of the courses that are out there now. But you know, people ask me which is the toughest race in the world, and I said Lanzarote. I thought, you know, I still to this day think that course is tough on a hot and very windy day on that island. It's tough. Yeah. Yes.
Ironman's obviously a very mental race as well as a physical race from the emotional side. How do you approach the race to get through it mentally and psychologically?
So he's asking me, how do I approach a race mentally and psychologically to get through it? So to answer your question, to be honest with you, the mental side of it is by far the hardest. You know, you train, everybody trains, and you go out there and you do your training, and your competency to handle the physical part is done. You do that by virtue of going out the door every day. The actual race itself is you have to be on yourself every minute, every second of the entire time. So it's like, people think it's, you know, when you watch an athlete, you go, wow, that is so, inspiring when you see what they do. But let me tell you, your day goes like this. Okay, I'm treading water, the race is about to start. Why on earth did I sign up for this race? It was the stupidest thing I've ever done. Why am I here? No, okay, you know, and then your races, you're swimming.
Karen smiles and just kicked me in the face. Why did she do that?
Yeah, I know, and you're swimming, and you go, why is this person, what about my stroke? Am I siding the buoy? Should I breathe to the other side? Am I going too hard? Here's a pair of feet. Should I get on them? Is this too hard? No, this isn't. No, this is good. I'm going to try and say that. Why is this person trying to cut me off? And then the day goes, I'm on the bike. How am I feeling? Should I stand up this hill? Should I sit down? Here comes the aid station. How much have I eaten? How much have I had enough to drink? How many calories have I taken in? Should I put in my big rings, my small ring? My back's hurting. I think I'm going to stretch. And blah, 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 blah. And this is how the whole day goes. And you want to know why people are crying when they cross the finish line? They've had to listen to themselves the whole day. And it's a lot, and that's what it takes to be successful. It's you on you, because you think about how we are in our daily lives. Most people are listening to music when they train, they're talking, when they're not training, they're looking at their phones, you're online. The only time you're ever by yourself is when you're sleeping. And then you get to an Ironman race, and even though there are people around, it's you all by yourself. And there's no music to listen to or anything. And so it's that whole process of dealing with yourself the whole day, and then at the same time you're going like, this really sucks, why am I doing this, this is so hard, I don't think I can do it. And then you start to feed yourself you know excuses, and then you have to come back and you feed yourself what you need to do to keep yourself going. And and you want to know what I think about? That's what I think about every second of every race, except for when I was collapsing and worried about winning. instead of what I needed to take at the aid station. It's figuring out what you need to do at that moment, at that time. And the people say, what is the one piece of advice I can give? And the one piece of advice I can give is that you have a reservoir of go-tos in a race, because everything that happens in a race has happened to you at some point in training. You've had a low, you've had a bad day, you've had a good day, you've been dehydrated, you've eaten too much, you've gone out too hard. Everything that's happened to you that could potentially happen in a race has already happened to you in training. So when you're in a race, how you get through a race is pulling from your stockpile of all the experiences you've had from training. Instead of panicking because you're in a competitive situation, you just have to go, okay, well, what would I do if I was in training? I would slow down, I would walk at the aid station, I would gear down, I would, you know, grab a piece of candy at the aid station. You just have to bring yourself back to everything that you've done in preparing, because nothing that happens in a race is any different from happening in training. Your greatest races are a combination. You hope to have a combination of your greatest training days happen for you in a race. So it's not like you're suddenly going to run a minute a mile faster in your race. It's putting it all together. So I think that becomes the mental disconnect, is that athletes think that something different will happen in a race than has happened to them in training, and that is an absolute myth. It's what you always hope for when you're doing an Ironman or a triathlon, is that you have a great training day. You take the best parts of your training and they come together. And if they don't, you know how to handle it. It's all in there.
Great question, great answer.
Yep.
If we've got any more questions, it'd be good. So we've got a few more minutes left. Anyone over this side? Here we go.
Have you got children, or have you got female friends, athletes, pro, or friends who do triathlon as a hobby who have children? And what do you think is the influence of female athletes when it comes both to family life and physical as well? And do you think long distance triathlon, Ironman triathlon, can be a hobby for women who have a family or want to have a family?
So my answer is, obviously I don't feel as informed as it can be. I mean, because I don't have children, but I have a lot of friends who do. In fact, I would say more than 50% of the women around me do have children. And I think that it's very time consuming and energy consuming when you have young children, as what I've seen around me, that I think short course triathlon is extremely manageable for women that want to be involved in the lifestyle and have an athletic goal. Ironman is always a big ask with very young kids that are not of school age. Around me, the women that I've seen that manage to handle it, at least have kids and have their children are in school, which frees them up with some time. But it's nonetheless, I think, a very big ask for women because of the time commitment, and to me it's the energetic commitment, because in order to have energy for family and children, is pretty significant. So my advice is because I see women that are very addicted to Ironman, and they go year after year, and I always feel like perhaps a year of short course racing would not be a bad idea when you have a lot of commitments with family. But I do think that the role model of having a mom and a woman that's very strong athletically is great, and it can only be positive, because when I do look around me, parents and particularly moms that are very athletic, their children tend to want to be in sports, which I can only say is a great thing. But it's a very tough line to navigate during some of the formative years of children's lives. that help?
And we've got time for one more question. So who would like the honour of the last question of Saturday? Here we go.
When you first started racing Ironman, did you have much advice in terms of the nutrition that you take on, especially during the races, or did you just do more of what felt natural and what made your body feel good at the time?
So this is a great question about nutrition. Did I have any guidelines? I honestly had no guidelines on nutrition, and you know, nutrition training started to dictate nutrition. So would go on some training runs, and in South Africa, you know, the ultra distance crew would do these long training runs, stop at a store, drink a Coke, eat a Kit Kat, everybody get fired up and, you know, run hard back. And so I had very little engineered nutrition or actual nutrition advice in terms of the number of calories. So a lot of it was based on feel, and it wasn't until, you know, I made a few mistakes on nutrition that I started to figure it out. And I started in an era without a lot of the sports nutrition that was around. So somebody was asking about something, you know, interesting nutrition-wise. In my first Ironman races, the way I would get my nutrition together was straight out of the grocery store. You know, which candy bar had the most calories in it, the smallest with the most calories. And this is kind of disgusting, and it certainly was disgusting back then. Everybody's like, I get a bottle and I would go down the baby food aisle and I would fill a bottle with pureed bananas or banana yogurt and mix in a little bit of grape juice and go, well, this is a bottle with lots of calories. If babies can eat it, I'm sure I can eat it while I was doing it. I'll tell you what, it smelled like vomit when it was left, whatever was left on your bike when you picked it up the next day, but it was kind of gross. So it was very experimental. But again, I tried to use what I used in training, which was commercially bought, you know, gas station sodas and candy bars, and you know, so nutrition it's complicated out there right now. There's a lot of noise going on with regard to nutrition, so you got to find a way to simplify it. And I can promise you, I used to just troll the grocery store looking for something that I really like. Because let me just say one thing to you: if you find something you really like and it works for you in training, it might work for you in race conditions.